out! You're nothing but dead weight. Take your useless tears with you.
He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply threw her out and walked away like she never mattered. She left with no home, no savings, no one waiting for her. But the story didn't end there.
Ma'am, the CEO wants to see you immediately.
Get out. Take your useless life with you, her ex-husband sneered as he tossed her bags into the street. No pity, no hesitation, and not even a glance at the woman who had once carried his entire world on her back. She left with nothing, no home, no savings, no family but the grandmother who was gone, and one dusty old bank card tucked inside an envelope she'd never opened. Out of desperation, she tried it, just once, just to see if life had left her anything at all. But the moment the teller swiped the card, everything changed. Her screen flashed red, and the bank alarms went silent. Staff rushed around, whispering her grandmother's name like a secret they were forbidden to speak. And then the manager stepped back with trembling hands and said, "Ma'am, the CEO wants to see you immediately." In that single moment, the woman who had been thrown out like trash became the woman the entire bank stood for. "Hello, family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request, please. Subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together, we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive." Emily didn't see the suitcase coming. One moment she was begging Mark to at least talk to her. The next she heard the rough scrape of luggage on hardwood and watched her own bag fly past her feet and land on the porch with a dull thud. The house behind him still smelled like the breakfast she cooked every morning, but his face held nothing familiar. Just a cold, polished confidence that made her stomach twist. "Get out," Mark said, voice flat, like he was commenting on the weather. "Take your useless life with you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet certainty in it cut deeper than anything she'd ever heard from him. He looked at her like she was a problem he'd finally solved. "Mark, what are you doing?" Her voice cracked. "We can talk about this. Just tell me what's going on." He didn't even bother answering. He reached inside, grabbed another bag, and tossed it onto the porch beside the first. Then he wiped his hands on his slacks like touching her belongings somehow dirtied him. From the doorway, Vanessa leaned one shoulder against the frame, sipping from a mug that wasn't hers. She watched the scene with casual delight, as if she'd been waiting years for this moment. "Should have seen this coming, Em," Vanessa said softly, almost sing-song. "Some people just don't fit where they don't belong." Emily's breath caught. "Vanessa, please, can you at least—" But Vanessa was already smiling, slow and satisfied, the kind of smile that said this wasn't sudden at all. This was planned. Mark checked his watch. "I'm late for a meeting. Just go. Don't make this dramatic." "Dramatic?" Emily almost laughed, but the sound broke on the way out. "You're throwing your wife out of her own home." "Not your home." Vanessa set down her mug with a light clink. "Your name isn't on the deed anymore." Emily felt the world tilt. "What? That's not possible. Mark and he would never." Vanessa pushed off the doorframe, walked to the porch, and bent down until her face was inches from Emily's. Her perfume smelled expensive, thick, and smug. "I handled the paperwork myself. A month ago. You signed something without reading it. Remember that?" Emily did remember. Mark had slid a stack of papers across the table one night, saying they were routine refinancing forms. He'd kissed her forehead and told her to relax while she signed. She'd trusted him. Now her hands shook as she looked from Vanessa to Mark. You planned this." Mark gave her a long, empty stare. "I planned a future. You're simply not part of it anymore." She would have collapsed right there if her pride hadn't pushed her spine straight. She grabbed the handle of one bag, holding it like a lifeline. "Fine," she whispered, "but give me access to our savings. I have nothing on me. Just let me—" Mark's expression flickered with something almost amused. What savings? Emily froze. He lifted a shoulder. Everything's tied up in business expenses right now. I told you that. You said it was temporary, she breathed. It was, he said calmly. Until today. The door closed before she could speak another word. Vanessa's final smirk was the last thing she saw before the lock clicked. Emily stood on the porch with her bags around her feet, staring at the door like maybe it would swing open again. Like maybe Mark would realize what he'd done. But nothing moved. Not a curtain, not a shadow. Nothing. She finally forced herself down the steps, her legs trembling the whole way. When she reached the sidewalk, she couldn't stop the hot tears that broke free. She hated crying in public, but the betrayal felt so sharp, so total, she couldn't swallow any of it down. A car passed slowly, the driver glancing at her, then quickly looking away. She knew what she must look like, someone whose life had been emptied out in broad daylight. She dragged her bags toward the bus stop, her mind flashing through moments she had tried to ignore. Mark coming home late, saying he was networking. Vanessa whispering with him in the kitchen when they thought she was asleep. The accountant dodging her questions about where their quarterly bonuses went. It formed a picture she never wanted to see. When the bus groaned up to the stop and she got on, she sat in the far back seat and pressed her hands together tightly. She wished she could call her grandmother. Grace always knew what to do. Grace always found a way to turn chaos into direction. But Grace was gone, and the only thing she'd left behind was a memory of her voice saying, "Don't let people define what you're worth." Emily swallowed hard. At that moment, she felt worth absolutely nothing. She ended up in the cheapest motel she could find, the kind where the front desk clerk didn't ask questions, because he didn't care. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. Her bag sat in the corner, looking just as lost as she felt. She dropped onto the bed, her chest tight with exhaustion, betrayal, humiliation, everything at once. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe, but every inhale came with another memory she didn't want. Mark on the night they married, promising he'd protect her. Mark asking her to quit her job so he could take care of her. Mark convincing her that his family would grow to love her. She had believed him. She had believed all of them. By morning, the ache in her chest was dull but steady, like a bruise being pressed again and again. She needed a plan. She had no home, no money, no husband, and no family besides a grandmother buried 3 years earlier. She opened her last remaining bag, the one Grace had given her years ago. Inside were a few clothes, an old photo of her and Grace at a county fair, and a sealed envelope she'd never opened. She stared at it, confused. She didn't remember packing it, and Grace had never given her an envelope like this. She picked it up carefully. Her name was written in Grace's strong, looping handwriting. Underneath, in smaller letters, "For when the world forgets your value." Emily felt her throat tighten. She tore the envelope open slowly, almost afraid of what she'd find. Inside was a faded, dusty bank card. Not a debit card, not a credit card. Something older, heavier. She turned it over. On the back, in neat blue ink, Grace had written a single line, "Use only when you're ready to start again." That didn't make any sense. Grace had never had much money. She lived on a teacher's pension and a stubborn sense of pride. The idea that there was anything attached to this card felt impossible. Still, the thought of even a few dollars was enough to make Emily's stomach twist with hope. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She slipped the card into her pocket, grabbed her bag, and headed for the nearest branch of Ridgeway Bank, the one she used to walk past on her way to high school. It was larger now, renovated, with glass doors that gleamed too brightly. Inside, it smelled like coffee and furniture polish, and everyone moved with quiet, professional speed. She stepped up to the teller, a young man with neat hair and nervous hands. He smiled politely. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Emily placed the card on the counter. "I'd like to check the balance on this." The teller picked it up, studied it with mild confusion, then shrugged and slid it through the machine. The moment he did, the lights above them flickered. The teller frowned. The screen in front of him flashed bright red, then black, then red again. The computer beeped once, sharp, metallic, and then every monitor within sight went silent. The room filled with a low hum. Staff looked up from their desks. A woman in a suit at the far counter froze mid-sentence. "What in the world?" the teller whispered. He tried the card again. The machine shut itself off. A man 3 stations down whispered, "It's her name. Look." Emily followed his gaze to the teller's screen, where one single line pulsed in red letters. Grace Hathaway, restricted access. More people turned. Murmurs stirred the air. "That's impossible," someone said. "After all these years? Should we call?" The teller's face had gone pale. He looked at Emily like she was something unexpected, something dangerous, something he didn't know how to handle. "Ma'am, just a moment." He hurried to the back room. Emily stood there confused, embarrassed, and now anxious enough that her fingers were shaking. She wasn't sure if she should run or wait. Part of her wanted to disappear before anyone else stared at her like that. But before she could move, a man in a navy suit stepped out from the back hallway. His tie was crooked, his breath uneven. Emily blinked. "I'm Emily. Grace was my grandmother." He swallowed so hard she saw his throat work. Please wait right here." The staff were whispering again, louder this time. "Grace Hathaway's heir. Is that really her? Should we alert?" The man in the navy suit stepped closer, his voice tight with caution. "Ma'am, the CEO wants to see you. Immediately." Emily stared at him. "The CEO? Why? I just wanted to check the balance." "Please," he said softly. "Don't be afraid, but we need to go upstairs." Upstairs, the executive floor, a place she had never even seen from the inside. She followed him past rows of wide eyes. Employees paused their calls. A woman near the break room clasped her hand over her mouth as Emily walked by. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her teeth. When they reached the private elevator, the man swiped a card and held the door for her. The elevator smelled like new leather and cold air. Emily stepped inside, clutching her grandmother's card, trying not to panic. The man pressed the top button, then leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been waiting 20 years for the rightful heir to walk through those doors." The doors slid shut. Emily gripped the elevator rail so tightly her fingers ached. The words the man whispered kept circling her mind, impossible and heavy. Rightful heir. Her grandmother? Grace, who'd clipped coupons and taught middle school English and fixed leaky sinks with duct tape? Grace, who'd stored cash in mason jars and baked pies for neighbors who didn't deserve them? How could any of this make sense? The elevator climbed slowly, each floor passing with a soft chime that made her pulse spike. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest couldn't find a rhythm. She didn't belong here. She wasn't dressed for this. She wasn't ready for whatever waited beyond those polished doors. When the elevator finally stopped, the display said executive level. The doors opened on a quiet hallway lined with frosted glass and abstract art that probably cost more than her old car. The man in the navy suit stepped out first and motioned for her to follow. "Right this way, Miss Hathaway." Emily forced her legs to move. Her sneakers squeaked against the glossy floor, the sound far too loud in the hushed space. She felt eyes on her the whole way, though no one else appeared in the hall. The air had a strange weight to it, like everyone in the building was holding their breath at once. They stopped outside a double door of dark wood. The brass plate read, "Jonathan Pierce, Chief Executive Officer." The man knocked once. "Sir, she's here." A voice came from inside, calm, controlled. "Send her in." The man opened the door and stepped aside. Emily hesitated for a second, fear rising like a tide inside her. But turning back wasn't an option. She stepped into the office. The room was huge, lined with tall windows that showed the whole city. The desk was a sleek shape of black glass, and behind it stood Jonathan Pierce. Mid-50s, silver hair, posture sharp as a blade. He took one look at Emily and stared as if he already knew her. "Miss Hathaway," he said, and his tone was strange. Not warm, not cold. Something like caution mixed with respect. "Thank you for coming." Emily felt her voice waver. "I didn't really choose to come. Your staff just... Something happened with the card." "Yes." Jonathan gestured for her to sit, though he did not sit himself. "We're aware." Emily sat anyway because her knees might give out otherwise. She placed the old bank card on her lap, the plastic warm from her hands. Jonathan kept watching her like he was studying rare glass. "How long have you had that card?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "My grandmother left it in an envelope. I never opened it until this morning." He inhaled slowly, almost like he was steadying himself. "Miss Hathaway, your grandmother was not an ordinary customer." Emily's stomach tightened. "I know she had an account here, but she didn't have money. We struggled growing up." Jonathan's eyes flickered. "I'm afraid she kept many things from you." Emily didn't know what to say to that. Grace didn't keep secrets, not big ones. She was honest to a fault. But Jonathan Pierce looked like a man who wasn't speculating. He looked like someone delivering news he'd rehearsed for years. He walked around the desk and stood closer, giving her the full weight of his attention. "Your grandmother was one of Ridgeway Bank's founding investors, a silent partner. Her share was substantial." Emily almost laughed. It burst out as a tiny shock sound. "What? No. No, that can't be right. My grandmother lived in a rented house with bad pipes. She never even bought a new car." Jonathan nodded once. "I can imagine she preferred privacy. But the facts are the facts. She owned 20% of this institution." Emily's throat went dry. 20%? That's impossible. Why would she never tell me? "That," he said quietly, "is the question the board asked for 2 decades. He took the card from her hands and held it like something fragile. "This card is tied to a secured vault account. It hasn't been accessed since Grace Hathaway stopped responding to board communications." Emily shook her head. "She didn't stop responding. She got sick. She wasn't checking her mail. She didn't know anything about board meetings." Jonathan's expression shifted, just slightly, like her answer didn't fit what he'd been told. "I see. We believed she withdrew by choice." "No," Emily whispered. "She never said anything about the bank. Not once. If she had, I don't know. I would have asked questions." "I believe you," Jonathan said, but his eyes held a shadow of something heavier, something that made goosebumps rise on her arms. "Still, there's a protocol we must follow. Your grandmother's shares were tied to a succession clause, meaning when she passed, the rights transferred." He paused. Emily waited, pulse hammering. "To her heir," he finished. "You." She stared at him, unable to breathe. "That's not possible. I don't have money. I don't have anything. I can't even buy lunch." Jonathan gave a small, tense smile. "That's about to change. But you must understand, your inheritance is not just financial. It is political. There are board members who won't be pleased you've resurfaced. Some spent years assuming your grandmother's line had ended." Emily blinked hard. "Why would they think that?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Because the Hathaway shares give majority control when combined with a certain voting bloc. Your presence changes the balance of power. Some will see you as inconvenient." The room suddenly felt colder. "I didn't ask for any of this," Emily whispered. "No one asked for destiny," Jonathan said gently, "but it arrives anyway." Destiny. The word felt too heavy for her shoulders, especially shoulders that had carried grocery bags, laundry, and everyone else's needs for so long. She hadn't even been able to carry her marriage. How was she supposed to carry something like this? Jonathan returned the card to her. "I'll have my assistant bring you the preliminary documents. We'll begin the verification process today." "Verification?" Emily frowned. "What does that mean? Proof of identity, proof of lineage, a formal claim. You understand? This level of inheritance must be confirmed legally." "Of course," she said, though she didn't understand at all. "But are you sure? I mean, maybe there's a mistake? My grandmother she just never acted like someone who owned anything like this." Jonathan studied her carefully. "Some people live quietly because they are afraid of what noise will bring." The words felt too familiar, too close to something she'd felt her entire life. Before she could ask more, the office door opened and a woman stepped inside. She wore a fitted suit and carried a tablet pressed to her chest. Her expression was calm, but when she saw Emily, her eyes widened just a fraction, like she was looking at something unexpected and long awaited. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "the board chair is asking if you've—" Then she saw the card in Emily's hand. Her breath caught. Jonathan gave her a look that stopped whatever she was about to say. Not now. Prepare the verification package and alert security that we may need escort protocol. Escort? Emily whispered. Jonathan ignored the question. The assistant nodded and left quickly, her heels clicking down the hallway. When the door shut, Jonathan leaned against the edge of his desk. Miss Hathaway, you should know. Your grandmother didn't simply invest in this bank. She shaped it. She challenged decisions, exposed unethical practices, and forced internal audits. Some admired her, others did not. Emily felt a chill slide down her spine. What are you saying? That her absence changed the culture of this place, for better or worse. His mouth pressed into a thin line. There are people who built their careers on the idea that she was gone forever. Emily swallowed hard. And now I'm here. Yes, Jonathan folded his arms, and they will respond in ways you may not expect. She pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. I just wanted to check the balance. I'm not trying to start a war. Jonathan's eyes softened. Miss Hathaway, you didn't start anything. He paused. But your presence will finish something. Emily sat back, overwhelmed. Her life had collapsed 6 hours ago. Now she was sitting in a corner office being told she inherited a silent empire she never knew existed. She wanted to stand up and walk out, but her legs wouldn't obey. What happens now? She whispered. Jonathan opened his mouth to answer, but the door burst open. His assistant stood there, breathless, tablet shaking in her hands. Sir, security says the south entrance has been breached. Someone's trying to access restricted files. Jonathan Pierce didn't sit when Emily re-entered his office the next morning. He stood behind his desk with his hands pressed flat against the glossy surface, staring at the window like something in the city bothered him. When he finally turned toward her, his expression held something she hadn't seen yesterday. Wariness mixed with a kind of quiet dread. Miss Hathaway, he said, voice softer than before. Thank you for coming back. Emily shifted in the chair opposite him, still feeling out of place in the room with its expensive silence. I didn't really have a choice. Your assistant said it was important. It is. Jonathan lowered himself into his chair, like his bones carried more weight than they should. We need to talk about Grace. Hearing her grandmother's name from this man always jolted her. What about her? He looked at her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Your grandmother was not just a silent partner. She was one of the architects of Ridgeway Bank. She helped build this institution. She influenced its ethics, its lending practices, its public reputation. She was formidable, Emily swallowed. I know she was strong, but she never talked about any of this. She wouldn't have. Jonathan leaned back. Because her relationship with the original board did not end well. The split was bitter, ugly. She wanted to expose some of their actions. They wanted her gone. Emily blinked. Gone? As in removed? As in erased, he said quietly. Her influence, her shares, her ability to challenge them. A cold spark ran through Emily's spine. She leaned forward. Are you saying they pushed her out? I'm saying, Jonathan replied carefully, that when powerful people feel threatened, they become creative in how they resolve problems. The room felt smaller suddenly. Emily thought of how private Grace was, how carefully she avoided talking about certain years of her life. She thought of the day Grace sat her down and said, "Don't let people define what you're worth." Back then, it felt like grandmotherly advice. Now it felt like a warning. Jonathan tapped his fingers on the desk. Your return changes everything. Some board members hoped, themselves, that the Hathaway line would never surface again. And now here you are. Emily looked away, gripping her hands together. I didn't come back. I didn't even know anything existed to come back to. I was kicked out of my home yesterday. I was just hoping that card had enough money on it for groceries. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. Life shifts quickly, Miss Hathaway, sometimes violently. He opened a folder on his desk and slid a document across the glass. I'm authorizing temporary access to a holding account connected to your grandmother's original shares. Emily tried not to gasp. The number printed there was more than she had ever seen in her life, even with the zeros blurred slightly for privacy. Jonathan lifted a hand. Temporary. This is not the full inheritance. That will take time. There will be investigations, challenges, legal verification. Some board members will not welcome you. You need to prepare for that. Prepare how? Emily whispered. By understanding that no one in this building is neutral. Not even me. She stared at him. Why would you tell me not to trust you? His mouth twitched into a small, tired smile. Because I respect your grandmother, and because she would want you to move through this place with your eyes open. There are things about her past that I cannot discuss yet, things that might change how you see the bank, and me. Emily felt the air thicken around her. So you're protecting me? Not exactly, he said. I'm protecting the institution, but for now our interests align. It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. Jonathan closed the folder. Access to the funds will activate later today. Until then, I advise you to go somewhere public, somewhere visible. Do not meet with anyone privately unless you absolutely must. She didn't understand the severity in his voice, but she nodded anyway. She stood to leave. As she reached the door, he said one more thing. Emily, your grandmother fought hard for what was right. It cost her everything. If the same fight comes to you, be certain of who stands beside you. She wasn't certain of anything anymore. She left the office with her mind spinning, her heart pounding. She barely made it out of the building before her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated but answered. A familiar voice dripped through the line. Em, finally. Where the hell have you been? Her stomach turned. Mark. She almost hung up, but he spoke again before she could. I heard a rumor, he said, and she could hear the anger he was trying to hide under fake concern. People said they saw you at Ridgeway Bank yesterday, with security. Is that true? Emily looked around the sidewalk, suddenly aware of every passing face. Why do you care? Mark scoffed. You're still my wife. Ex-wife, she said sharply. You ended that yesterday, remember? Don't exaggerate. His tone dipped into that smooth, dismissive rhythm she hated. We were both emotional. I was stressed. We can talk about everything. Just tell me what's going on with the bank. Emily almost laughed. Wow, that didn't take long. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said, voice low and steady, that you threw me out with nothing, and now you hear I walked into a bank and suddenly you want to talk. That's not fair, he snapped. I'm trying to fix this. Her hand tightened around her phone. Fix it? You lied to me for months. You drained our savings. And I know you weren't at a conference last spring. He paused, just enough to confirm everything. What are you talking about? He finally asked. The perfume, she said quietly. You came home reeking of someone else. Mark went silent, a heavy, guilty silence. Emily let it hang long enough for him to sweat, then added, And before you ask, no, I'm not stupid. I know exactly who it was. His voice broke into a stumble. Emily, it's complicated. Say her name, Emily whispered. Go on, say it. He exhaled sharply, the sound of a cornered man. Fine. It was Chloe, Vanessa's friend. The confirmation still hit harder than she expected. She pressed a hand to a street lamp to steady herself. You cheated on me with Vanessa's best friend. It didn't mean anything, Mark rushed. I was stressed. You and I were distant. Vanessa said. He cut himself off, realizing too late that he had just exposed another layer. Emily's voice dropped. Vanessa said what? A new voice answered from behind her. She said you were becoming a burden. Emily spun around. Vanessa stood a few feet away, arms crossed, smile sharp. Mark was still ranting through the phone. Emily hung up on him without a word. Vanessa stepped closer. You know I tried to keep him from telling you. I tried to be the one who spared you, but you just keep showing up where you don't belong. Emily's heart burned in her chest. I belonged in my own marriage. I belonged in the home you helped take from me. You belonged, Vanessa said, leaning in so close Emily could smell her expensive makeup. Exactly where we put you. Quiet, grateful, out of the way. Emily didn't move. Vanessa's voice softened into something even uglier. Don't rise above your station, sweetheart. You don't belong with people who matter. Emily felt the words hit her like a slap. Vanessa waited, expecting her to fold, to cry, to shrink. But Emily just stared back, letting the anger settle into something cold and determined. Vanessa's smile twitched when she didn't get the reaction she wanted. She stepped back. "Tell Mark I said hi." She walked away like she'd already won. Emily stood there breathing hard, trying to hold herself together. A lifetime of swallowing insults, of staying quiet, of keeping peace. It all pressed in on her at once. She didn't feel small this time. She felt angry, and anger held her upright. She didn't know yet that the day was only going to get worse. She didn't know that within hours she would lose the last pieces of her old life. She didn't know that betrayal had deeper roots than she imagined. She only knew one thing: she would not be quiet again. She headed down the sidewalk, gripping her bag and her grandmother's card, not knowing that someone was already following her. Emily walked several blocks before she realized the temporary access Jonathan promised hadn't activated yet. Her phone buzzed with another email saying her balance was still zero. She tried not to panic, but her hands were trembling. She needed food, a place to sleep, a plan, anything. She ducked into a small cafe to breathe and gather herself. She ordered nothing and sat at a corner table, pretending to read a menu she couldn't afford. Every time the door opened, her nerves jumped. She kept expecting Vanessa or Mark to appear again. She checked the bank app one more time. Still frozen. A young woman behind the counter eyed her kindly, but also with a hint of pity. Emily understood the look. She'd given it to strangers many times, back when she thought her life was stable. Now she felt like an outsider everywhere she went. After 20 minutes of trying to calm her heart, she stepped back onto the sidewalk. The sky had turned gray, clouds stacking over each other like heavy threats. She pulled her jacket tighter, though it did little to warm her. A block later, she reached the curb where she'd parked her old sedan the previous night. Only the curb was empty. She stared at the yellow paint on the ground, confusion swirling. Then she looked for broken glass, thinking maybe it had been stolen. But a man across the street yelled, "Tow truck came an hour ago. They said the owner surrendered rights." Emily felt something inside her crack. She walked across traffic toward the man. "What do you mean?" "Fine." He shook his head. "Not my rules. You got to clear the room until payment's verified. I can't have people skipping out." "I'm not skipping out," she said, voice shaking. "I don't even have a car to skip with." "Look, miss, I'm not trying to be rude, but rules are rules. I already packed your stuff for you." He pointed to 2 bags by the stairs. "I can hold them for an hour." Her cheeks burned. "I'll take them." She grabbed the bags quickly, hoping he wouldn't see the humiliated shine in her eyes. As she walked back into the rain, she thought of Jonathan's warning. Don't meet with anyone privately unless you must. Maybe she should have asked what he meant. Maybe she should have stayed in the bank lobby where people could see her. Maybe she shouldn't have answered Mark's call. Her thoughts tangled until she couldn't separate one feeling from another. She dragged her bags toward a dim bus shelter and sat down. The shelter roof leaked, but she didn't care. She hugged her knees and watched the rain slide down the glass. She didn't know how long she sat there before a voice interrupted her. "Rough day." She startled and turned. A middle-aged man in a Ridgeway Bank lanyard stood a few feet away. His hair was rain-soaked and he carried a messenger bag that looked too full. She didn't recognize him. "Sorry," he said quickly, raising his hands in a harmless gesture. "I don't mean to scare you. I saw everything that happened at the bank yesterday. I was in the back office." Emily's heart jolted. "Who are you?" "Just an analyst," he said. "Name's Arthur. Don't worry, no one knows I'm talking to you." "Why are you talking to me?" Arthur looked over his shoulder, then stepped closer but stayed outside arm's reach. "Because you're walking into a storm you don't understand, and because your grandmother didn't deserve what happened to her." Emily tensed. "What do you know about her?" Arthur opened his bag and pulled out a manila envelope, sealed with tape so worn it looked like it had been peeled open and shut many times. He held it like it carried weight. "This came to my desk this morning. No sender, no explanation. Just your name written on top. I think someone inside the bank wants you to have it." Emily stared at it. "Why give it to me? Why not your boss?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Because my boss is one of the people who didn't want the Hathaway line to return, and because if they knew I gave you this, I'd be out of a job at best." Emily hesitated. He looked ordinary. Maybe too ordinary. but his eyes held a kind of urgency she recognized, a quiet fear. She reached for the envelope. He pulled it back slightly. "One thing," he said, "be careful who you trust, especially the ones who seem to be on your side." Her breath caught. "Do you mean Jonathan Pierce?" Arthur didn't answer. He simply pressed the envelope into her hands, stepped back into the rain, and walked away fast, disappearing around the corner. Emily stared down at the envelope. Her name was scrawled across the front in a quick, uneven hand. She sat in the bus shelter and peeled the weakened tape. Inside was a single plastic sleeve containing an old photograph. Her fingers trembled as she slid it out. It showed a younger Grace, maybe in her 40s, shaking hands with three men in suits in front of a half-finished Ridgeway Bank sign. The smile on her grandmother's face looked determined, proud, powerful. Emily swallowed hard. She looked at the men next to Grace. The first she didn't recognize. The second she did, Jonathan Pierce, much younger. The third, her breath stopped. The third was Mark's father. She stared at his face, stunned. She had seen that man at holidays, at family events, at the head of long tables. He had barely spoken to her beyond polite small talk. He had never hinted at knowing her grandmother. But in the photo, he was standing right beside her, shaking hands like a man closing an important deal. Emily felt the room spin even though she was outside. Grace, Jonathan, and Mark's father. Together. A cold wave washed through her body. She turned the photo over, half afraid of what she might find. There was handwriting on the back. Sharp, rushed, angry. They betrayed her once. Don't let them do it to you. Emily's hands froze around the photo as thunder rolled overhead. Someone inside that bank, maybe more than one person, had turned on her grandmother, and someone thought she might be next. She stared at the warning, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Rain splattered across the paper, blurring the ink, and for a long moment, Emily could only sit there, holding the past in her shaking hands, realizing the betrayal she had faced from Mark was nothing compared to the storm rising around her now. That was when she heard footsteps approaching from behind her, slow, heavy, like someone who already knew she'd found the truth. Emily didn't sleep the night she found the photo. Every sound outside the bus shelter felt like a threat. Every passing shadow felt too close. The footsteps behind her had turned out to be a drunk man looking for the nearest liquor store. But the fear that rushed through her had taken hours to fade. By morning, she forced herself to return to the bank. She needed answers. She needed Jonathan to stop circling around the truth and tell her exactly what Grace had been involved in. She needed something solid to stand on before the world swallowed her whole. But when she reached the front lobby, she noticed something different. Security guards stood taller. Employees whispered more openly. Eyes followed her, not with curiosity this time, but with something sharper, like suspicion. The elevator to the executive floor was locked. The receptionist avoided her gaze. "Is Mr. Pierce available?" Emily asked. The receptionist cleared her throat. "He's in a meeting." "I can wait." "You can't," the woman said, lowering her voice. "There's an emergency board session. You're not allowed upstairs right now." Emily felt a cold drop hit her stomach. "Why not?" But the woman only shook her head. Before she could press further, two security officers walked toward her. One of them spoke in a rehearsed tone, the kind used for keeping people calm. "Miss Hathaway, we're going to have to ask you to step into the conference room." The fear she thought had died overnight surged back to life. "Why? What's going on?" "We have orders," the guard said. "It's about your claim." "My claim?" Her voice cracked. "I haven't claimed anything yet. I only—" "Please," he said, gesturing. Emily followed them into a small glass room off the lobby. Moments later, the conference screen flickered on. Jonathan appeared, sitting among several men and women in suits. Their expressions were hard, unfriendly. Jonathan didn't look at her directly. That was the first sign something was wrong. "Miss Hathaway," he began, voice formal, stripped of yesterday's warmth. "This is an emergency meeting of the Ridgeway Bank Board. We need to address concerns regarding your presence and your alleged inheritance." "Alleged," the word stung. Emily leaned toward the screen. "Jonathan, what's happening? We talked about this yesterday. You said—" "Let's be clear," one board member interrupted. "No one promised you anything. You appeared out of nowhere with a card that shouldn't even be active. Another chimed in. And leaked internal information surfaced this morning, suggesting you may have obtained that card improperly. Emily's breath caught. What? No. My grandmother left it for me. It was hers. Can you prove that? A woman asked, folding her hands. Because right now, this looks like an attempt to access confidential holdings. Jonathan still wasn't looking at her. He adjusted his tie, avoiding her eyes. The board has concerns about legitimacy. Until we verify your identity and Grace Hathaway's intentions, you are not recognized as a rights holder. Emily blinked, stunned. Jonathan, you said you believed me. I said we would review the situation, he replied, his tone cool, professional, distant. And now we are. It felt like a punch. Yesterday he'd warned her not to trust anyone, not even him. She thought he meant in the future. She didn't realize he meant now. A man near Jonathan leaned into the microphone. We are officially challenging your claim to the Hathaway inheritance. Until further notice, access to any associated accounts is frozen. Frozen? Her heart dropped. That access was temporary. You said, you misunderstood, Jonathan cut in quickly. It was never guaranteed. She stared at him, feeling something inside her slowly crumble. Why are you doing this? But Jonathan didn't answer. Someone muted the screen from their side, and the call ended without even a goodbye. Emily sat there in shock as the guards escorted her out of the conference room and back to the lobby. The building felt colder now, like every wall had listened to her humiliation. She walked outside feeling numb, the rain returning just in time to sting her face. Grace had warned her about people who pretend to care. Emily didn't expect it to hurt this much. She found a bench near the bus stop and sat heavily, her bags at her feet. She pulled out the photo again, studying the faces. Grace, Jonathan, and Mark's father, smiling like allies. If they had betrayed Grace once, what stopped them from doing it again? She tucked the photo back into the envelope and stood. She had to find Arthur, the employee who gave it to her. He might be the only person willing to tell her the truth. She headed to the bank's side entrance where staff usually smoked during breaks. A few employees she'd seen yesterday were there, leaning against the wall. Do you know where Arthur is? She asked one of them. The man shook his head. He didn't come in today. Did he call out sick? The group exchanged awkward glances. A woman finally stepped forward. HR said he resigned last night, packed his desk and left. Emily's stomach twisted. No, that's impossible. I saw him last night. Someone gave him that envelope. He was scared. The woman lowered her voice. Look, none of us know the real story, but HR doesn't just erase someone's profile overnight, unless they want it erased. Emily felt her knees weaken. She backed away from the group and walked toward the parking lot, each step heavier than the last. Arthur vanished, just like that, and no one wanted to talk about it. When she reached the sidewalk, she pulled out her phone to text him, just in case, but the message failed immediately, blocked, or worse. She walked without direction, her thoughts spinning too fast to arrange. She ended up outside a courthouse without even realizing how she got there. Her phone buzzed. A new email. Her breath stopped when she saw the sender. Mark Caldwell, reincarnate. Notice of legal action. She opened it with trembling hands. Emily, effective immediately, I am filing a claim for emotional damages related to your disturbance of my work environment, theft of confidential documents, and unlawful possession of marital property. Expect court papers within the week. Mark Caldwell. Her vision blurred for a second. Emotional damages, she whispered. You threw me out. But the worst part was the line about confidential documents. She remembered her bag sitting inside the house. She remembered Vanessa walking through her belongings while pretending to help. They planted something. They were building a case before they even kicked her out. She felt the fear rising again, this time deeper, sharper. She looked around the courthouse steps as though someone might be watching her, waiting for her reaction. Then her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from an unknown number. You should have stayed quiet. Emily's throat closed. She backed away from the courthouse, nearly stumbling. She didn't stop walking until she reached a park bench far from anyone else. The world around her felt too big, too loud, and she felt impossibly small. She wiped her eyes and forced herself to think. She needed answers, real answers. She needed to know why Grace had been pushed out, why Jonathan had turned on her, why Mark's father was in that photo. She needed something she didn't have anymore, an ally. But everyone she turned to either vanished, betrayed her, or used her. She didn't know the truth yet, but she felt it closing in. Her grandmother had been forced out in a hostile takeover, and Mark's family had been part of it. She stared at the ground as the reality settled into her bones. Her life wasn't just falling apart. Someone was helping it fall. She felt the first flicker of fear turn into something darker, something heavier, and somewhere deep inside her, a very small voice whispered, "You're next." Before she could move or think or breathe through the panic, the sky darkened again. Winds swept across the park, rustling the leaves like quiet warnings. Emily pulled her damp jacket around her and stood, ready to walk toward the train station, when her phone buzzed one more time. Blocked #1 new voicemail. She pressed play. Mark's voice filled the speaker first, yelling in the background at someone. A drawer slammed, papers rustled, then another voice, calm, cold, unfamiliar. She froze, but the message cut off before she could make out the words. Her phone buzzed again, same number, new voicemail, and she felt a chill run through her as she pressed play, knowing instinctively that her world was about to get even darker. Emily pressed play on the second voicemail, holding the phone so tightly it hurt her fingers. Wind rushed across the speaker, followed by footsteps and the faint scrape of a chair. For a moment, she thought the message was empty. Another glitch, another dead end. But then she heard it. A single breath. Then a whisper. "She doesn't know anything. Not yet." Emily froze. The voice wasn't Mark's. It wasn't anyone she recognized. But the tone, the certainty, felt like someone who had been watching her for a long time. A door slammed in the background. Mark's voice snapped through the speaker, frustrated. "She must have something. That card, she didn't just make that up." The unknown voice responded, low and steady. "We'll find out soon enough. The board's already turning against her. Pierce won't defend her. She's alone." A long pause followed. Then the stranger said something so quiet she barely caught it. Just like her grandmother. The voicemail cut off. Emily lowered the phone slowly, staring at the dark screen as if waiting for it to explain itself. She felt the same tightening in her chest she used to get as a kid when the school bully cornered her in the hallway. The feeling that the air was closing in and there was no one to call for help. The stranger knew Grace, the stranger knew her, and the stranger was working with Mark. The wind pushed through the trees again, cold and sharp, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Emily felt something close to real danger. She stood up quickly and shoved the phone into her pocket, glancing around the park in case anyone was watching her. Every bench looked suspicious. Every person passing by made her heart spike. She needed answers. She needed to know the whole truth about her grandmother, the takeover, the disappearance from the bank, the reason people seemed terrified she had returned. She needed to know what they were after, and she needed to know why they were so sure she was alone. She walked fast toward the train station, gripping her bag so tightly her knuckles ached. Rain soaked her hair and jacket, but she hardly felt it. Her mind kept replaying the voicemail on a brutal loop, just like her grandmother. What had they done to Grace? By the time she reached the station, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely buy a ticket, but she forced herself onto the next train anyway. She slid into a window seat and stared at her reflection. Pale, tired, scared, but not defeated. Not yet. She needed to do something before they made the next move. She took out the card again. Its edges were worn, the surface scratched from years of being tucked away. She remembered Grace's handwriting on the envelope. For when the world forgets your value. What did Grace know back then? Why had she hidden this from her? Emily took out the photo next, studying Grace's smile, the handshake with men who would later help force her out. And there, beside her, Mark's father with a grin that now felt sinister. On the back, the message glared up at her. They betrayed her once. Don't let them do it to you. Who wrote that? Arthur? Someone else? Someone inside the bank who was trying to help? Or someone trying to manipulate her? The train rattled through tunnels and her thoughts rattled with it. She arrived at the motel after dark, hoping the manager might show mercy and let her grab a few things from the room. He didn't. He looked at her like she was trouble and pointed to the door. She walked back outside with her bags, but she didn't have the strength to go far. She sat inside her car, what was left of it, and let the exhaustion finally swallow her. She pulled her jacket around her and curled up in the back seat. Thunder rolled in the distance. Rain pounded the roof of the car like impatient fingers. For a long time she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the engine noises of passing cars. She felt empty enough that the world could have taken anything else from her, and she wouldn't have been surprised. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe she was nothing. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. But the more she tried, the more her chest tightened. Tears finally slipped free, quiet and unsteady, soaking into the old upholstery. "Grandma," she whispered to no one, "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what they want. I don't know why you never told me." Silence answered her. Emily didn't know when she finally drifted off, but when she woke, the sky was ink black and the storm had eased into a cold drizzle. Her body was stiff, her throat dry. Her phone buzzed weakly, almost out of battery. She ignored the emails piling up from Mark's lawyer. She ignored the post Vanessa had apparently uploaded online. Screenshots of old text arguments, cropped to make Emily look unstable. A photo of their house with the caption, "Some people can't handle real life." It was all noise. But then, in the middle of the notifications, she saw it. Unknown number. "Call me. Urgent." Emily stared at it. Her pulse thudded once, hard. She didn't want to answer. Every unknown number so far had brought bad news. But something told her this one was different. She tapped the call icon. The phone rang once. Twice. On the third ring, someone picked up. There was no greeting, just breathing. Slow, rough breathing, like the person had waited a long time to make this call. Emily swallowed. "Hello?" No answer. She tried again, louder. "Who is this?" A gravelly voice finally spoke. Low, measured, tired. "You want the truth about Grace Hathaway?" Emily sat straighter, heart pounding. "Yes, who are you?" "That doesn't matter," the voice said. "What matters is this. Your grandmother didn't lose her shares. She hid them. The card you have? It's access to a shadow account, one the board never found." Emily felt her breath catch. Shadow account? It holds leverage, enough to control the bank, enough to ruin the people who destroyed her. Her pulse sped up. Then why can't I access it? They come for you, stand tall. You come from women who don't bend for bullies. And when they try to decide your worth, remember this. The only people afraid of your power are the ones who relied on you never discovering it. Don't let them shrink you, Emily. Not the board, not the Pierces. Not anyone who tries to rewrite your place in this world. With all my love, Grace. Emily pressed the letter to her chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She felt Grace there with her. Steady, fierce, warm. A strength rising inside that she didn't know she still had. She wiped her eyes and folded the letter carefully, placing it inside her bag. She tucked the shareholder agreement beside it. Then she heard it. A soft crunch of gravel outside the closet. She froze. Footsteps. Someone was inside the building. She pressed her back against the wall, heart thudding so loud she feared it would echo. More footsteps. Slow. Heavy. She peeked out from the closet doorway. A tall figure moved down the hall, flashlight beam scanning the rooms. His voice carried in the emptiness. "I know you're in here, Emily." Mark. Of course it was Mark. Her hands clenched into fists. He walked slowly, sweeping the light across the floor like a hunter. "You can make this easy," he said, voice dripping with false patience. "Just hand over the documents. You don't even know what to do with them. But I do." Emily stepped back into the closet, holding her breath. The metal box was still on the floor, the closet door still damaged. Anyone looking closely would see she'd been here. She needed to move. Quietly. Now. She eased along the wall and slipped out the back exit, her breath sharp in her throat. The cold morning air hit her like a slap. She grabbed her bag tighter and ran toward the fence. Behind her, Mark's voice echoed out the back door. "Emily, don't be stupid. Those papers don't belong to you." She didn't answer. She sprinted through the hole in the fence and didn't stop running until she reached her car. She threw her bag inside, turned the key, and prayed the engine wouldn't stall. It sputtered, groaned, then roared to life. She pulled away just as Mark appeared at the corner of the street, shouting her name like he still owned it. She didn't look back. By the time she reached Ridgeway Bank, her fear had transformed into something sharper. Resolve. She parked crookedly and marched inside. The same employees who once watched her with awe now stiffened at the sight of her. She didn't slow down. She didn't wait for permission. She stormed straight to the executive elevator. A guard stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, you can't—" "I'm going up," she said, her voice steady. "Not without an appointment." She leaned in. "I'm not here for a meeting. I'm here for the truth." Something in her tone must have landed, because the guard hesitated, just long enough for Jonathan's assistant to appear behind him. Her eyes widened when she saw Emily. "Miss Hathaway, what are you doing here?" "Take me upstairs," Emily said. "Now!" The assistant's mouth tightened. She swiped her badge without another word. Emily stepped into the elevator and held her bag close. Her pulse drummed hard, but not with fear anymore. With purpose. With certainty. With the weight of her grandmother's voice in her ear. When the elevator reached the top floor, the assistant led her down the hall toward the boardroom. Angry voices leaked through the doors. Accusations, panic, tension. "They're about to vote on your claim again," the assistant whispered. "Jonathan says—" Emily didn't wait for the rest. She pushed the doors open, and every head in the room snapped toward her. Jonathan stood at the head of the long table. His expression froze when he saw her, and Emily walked in with the truth in her hands. All eyes followed Emily as she stepped into the boardroom. No one spoke at first, not even Jonathan. They looked at her like she wasn't supposed to exist, like she'd returned from a grave they thought they had sealed. Emily walked straight to the center of the long table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I have the original shareholder agreement," she said. "The one you all pretended didn't exist." A ripple of shock moved around the room. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he still didn't speak. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope, placing it on the table. Her hand didn't shake. "My grandmother didn't walk away. She was pushed out. And you knew that. You covered it up." One of the older board members leaned forward. "Miss Hathaway, we've already told you—" Emily cut him off, her tone sharp but steady. "Save it. I know exactly what happened. Grace refused to support illegal lending practices. Practices some of you were involved in when the bank was founded. And when she refused to sign off, you forced her out," another voice rose. "Those are serious accusations." "I'm not accusing," Emily said. "I'm proving." She opened the envelope and slid the agreement across the table. Every board member leaned in. Some gasped. Some cursed. Some went completely silent. Jonathan stepped forward, finally finding his words. "Emily, where did you get this?" "My grandmother hid it," she replied, "because she knew one day the truth would matter. And she knew the board, this board, would try to bury it again." Jonathan looked at the document, and for the first time since she met him, he didn't look composed. He looked exposed. Before he could speak again, the boardroom doors flew open. Mark barged in, out of breath and furious. "Emily, stop this! Stop pretending you have power here." He pushed past two board members and marched toward her. "Give up the act. You don't even understand what you're holding." "I understand enough," she said. He slammed his hands on the table. "That's mine." She almost laughed. "It was never yours. It wasn't even your father's. It was Grace's, and now it's mine." Mark's face twisted. "You had nothing before me. Nothing. You think this suddenly makes you important?" Emily reached into her bag again and pulled out a second item, something she had kept hidden until now, a printed report. Mark blinked. "What's that?" "Proof," she said. "Bank records you tried to hide. Transactions you labeled as business expenses that were really payments to your mistress, and withdrawals from our joint account you used to fund your personal ventures. And that lawsuit you filed against me? The stolen documents were planted. Gasps filled the room. Jonathan stiffened. A board member whispered something about ethics violations. Another muttered the word embezzlement. Mark's face drained of color. You can't do this. I can, Emily said. And I am. He reached for her arm, but security stepped in before he touched her. 2 guards grabbed him, pulling him back. Mark shouted, demanding they let him go, claiming she was lying. Sit down, a board member snapped. He didn't, so the guards made him. Emily didn't flinch. You tried to break me, she said quietly, but you only made me stronger. You should have left me with nothing, because when you took everything away, you freed me. Jonathan cleared his throat, forcing control back into his voice. We need to vote. Every board member knew it. They exchanged looks, not confused ones this time, but resigned. One by one, hands rose. Remove Jonathan Pierce as CEO. Suspend the Pierce family's shares pending investigation. Hand interim control to the rightful controlling shareholder, Emily Hathaway. The vote was unanimous. Jonathan swallowed hard, the reality settling heavy on him. Miss Hathaway, he said, voice strained, the board recognizes you as the holder of controlling interest. You have authority to appoint the next chair. Emily didn't hesitate. I appoint myself. There were no objections. The room was quiet, heavy, recognizing the shift in power. Emily turned toward the guards. Escort Mr. Caldwell off the premises and notify the legal team. I'm pressing charges for fraud and embezzlement. Mark's shout echoed down the hall as they dragged him away. Vanessa wasn't present, but she felt the consequences too. Within hours, Emily directed the legal team to investigate Vanessa's doctored documents, leaked messages, and involvement in the false allegations. By afternoon, Vanessa's attorney was already begging for a settlement. The anonymous employee who had disappeared, Arthur, was reinstated once Emily exposed the HR manipulation. She demanded a full internal audit. She demanded transparency. And for the first time in 2 decades, Ridgeway Bank had to answer to a Hathaway again. When the dust settled, the boardroom emptied. Reporters began crowding the lobby. Employees whispered with a strange mix of fear and awe. Emily walked back into Jonathan's old office, now hers. The room felt different this time. Not threatening, not overwhelming, just quiet. She sat in the chair, pulled out Grace's letter and read the last line again. Power isn't about money. It's about knowing who you are when they try to take everything from you. Emily whispered it out loud, letting the words settle into the desk, the walls, the air. Power isn't about money. It's about knowing who you are when they try to take everything from you. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer. The city lights outside glowed against the windows. A world that had once pushed her out now waited for her decisions. She leaned back in the chair, hers now, and closed her eyes for one long breath. She didn't feel small. She didn't feel broken. She felt steady, certain, whole. She vowed then and there that she would never let anyone, family, board, or betrayer, decide her worth again. And she knew her grandmother would be proud. When she opened her eyes, the room felt lighter, like the world had shifted with her. Because when people strip you of everything, they expect you to stay small. But the moment you decide you're worth more, the world has no choice but to adjust.